couldn't. I can't.
Felicia, I don't know what to say.
Welcome to MojoPlays, and today we're taking a look at the 20 worst open world games. Open world games can be fun and all, but when you have massive stinkers like these ones, you only prove the cynics right. Cynics like me. What open world game made you jump back to reality? Did it make our list? Let us know down in the comments. Before we begin, we publish new videos all week long, so be sure to subscribe to MojoPlays and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Superman Returns. Some would argue that this movie license game is not as bad as most make it out to be. I am unfortunately one of those people. I don't exactly know why, but yes, there are some very small redeeming qualities that some might find make the game more enjoyable, at least enjoyable enough. That does not forgive the abysmal controls though. Superman controls as horrendously as he did in the infamous Nintendo 64 game. On top of that, defending Metropolis was about as demanding as babysitting a screaming child. It is constantly under threat, so much of your time will be spent averting the umpteenth crisis for the worst organized city in fiction. Unless you like watching over a continuously helpless society, Superman Returns is a hard pass. Dynasty Warriors 9. We know how Koei Tecmo's Warriors games are supposed to be played. Traverse a large map and use a small handful of characters to lead armies and fend off hordes of enemies. So Dynasty Warriors 9 should be fairly massive, right? Well, right, but not to the degree that this went. Not only did it make it an unnecessary jump from big maps to open world, Koei Tecmo didn't even bother to fill the world with anything. Making the game more insufferable were the uninspired missions that all felt exactly the same and the frustratingly stupid AI. The Warriors games are great for the most part, but 9 was just uncalled for. Spider-Man 3. The only reason anyone would want to check out Spider-Man 3's video game adaptation would be for that hilarious "I don't want to die" QuickTime failure. To play the game itself is borderline torment. Sure, the cutscenes and character models are laughably appalling, that sort of so bad it's good quality. Does that warrant suffering through clunky web swinging and poor optimization? Given that Beanox, Vicarious Visions, and Treyarch were behind the game, someone across the three studios or even higher up would have realized something went haywire, wouldn't they? Apparently not. Driv 3er. The lack of self-respect on display is evident from the dumb title alone. Look, the first two driver games were pretty solid games for the PS1, but where Driv 3er went wrong was in controls and AI. Players were really expected to meet an obscene level of difficulty while driving vehicles that handled as well as blocks of grease sliding over oil. Believe what you will about the payola scandal that occurred around launch, but regardless of what really went down, Driv 3er still wasn't worth the ducats.
I'll drive.
Tom Clancy's Ghost Recon Breakpoint. If you just want to pick off the dumbest militia to ever exist, then sure, go play Breakpoint. But if you want an open world game that will test your FPS skills and immerse you in an exotic world, there are other places to look. Breakpoint was simply a complete waste of time as it forced you to traverse across scattered locations with no rhyme or reason. You go around, take out dudes, loot for better guns and armor, rinse and repeat. It is a mindless cycle that Ubisoft had the audacity to support for nearly 3 years before completely abandoning it. Oh, and you know, like most Ubisoft games, it was buggy as hell. Not much of a surprise. Homefront: The Revolution. While the first Homefront provided a decent experience into alternate history where Korea invades and takes over the United States, its sequel had no such saving grace. Even with an interesting premise, it was not enough for anyone to overlook the incompetent AI, as enemies and NPCs would frequently run into walls, and the poor frame rate made some sections nauseating to play. And do we even need to get into how clumsy and off the gunplay can get? There just wasn't any reason to play this, not at launch, not after the patches, and certainly not now. Destroy All Humans: Path of the Furon.
You know, Poxy, old pal, sometimes you can be a real bummer.
Oh? I wonder if that could have anything to do with my no longer having a body!
Ooh, we're getting into personal vendetta territory here. Some might point to Big Willie Unleashed as the downfall of Destroy All Humans, but the real reason we stopped seeing Crypto and Pox was because of this pile of garbage. Path of the Furon was totally unacceptable given the quality we had seen in the first two games. While the transition into the 70s made sense for the franchise, what didn't make sense were the mundane mission structures, the awful dialogue constantly reused by NPCs, and the outright disgusting number of glitches that would frequently force players to have to reload the game again and again and again and again and again. Loyalists quickly abandoned the Furon Empire after this travesty. We're just glad the franchise's future looks a lot brighter these days thanks to those two stellar remakes. Conan Exiles. Spoiler alert, Exiles has almost nothing to do with the Barbarian and instead opts to appease the hardcore survival game fans. We'd forgive the change in genre had the combat not been so clunky, but if we're supposed to become mighty warriors, why doesn't this game feel satisfying when it comes to fighting? Plus, the barren world here makes it seem like Conan Exiles was far from finished when it launched. Who knows, maybe Funcom will make a sequel now that they have that questionable Tencent money. Big Bobby Car: The Big Race. Honestly, who would expect an open world game based on the Big Bobby Car toy line, let alone a good one? Perhaps little kids might not care about the game's lifelessness. For us though, it was a snooze fest. One would think a game centered on the big race would focus on a lot of racing. Makes sense, right? Alas, that is a very, very small fraction of the game. Most of it is spent hunting collectibles in a world filled with just about nothing. Nothing outside of the small town, just weird empty valleys, and a couple caves, and a farm. Yeah, that's what makes an open world, right? Oh, and also the NPCs, they're all living Bobby cars that talk like they're chewing cud. It's disturbing. And to think that they wanted $30 for an empty driving game that is 90% wandering for collectibles and 10% everything else. Can we move on? This game's giving me some trauma.
Whoa!
Metal Gear Survive.
Data acquired from memory board. I will analyze it.
Metal Gear seems to be primed for decades of just remasters and ports, but for a second, the future seemed grim. Konami loses the MGS mastermind after Phantom Pain, and what do after his exit? They try to make the franchise a co-op zombie survival. Uninspired, void of personality, outright boring. There is nothing that perfectly describes how awful Metal Gear Survive truly was. But if you do want something that summarizes its just sheer greed, then how about this? Monetized save files. Yeah, that was a thing. Dead Island Riptide.
Hearing this? If you are, the engines are on fire!
The first Dead Island was one of the biggest disappointments in gaming on account of an emotional trailer advertising a zombie survival game that had no ambition whatsoever. So maybe a sequel would improve things? Sure, in just art style. Dead Island Riptide was practically the first game completely recycled with a slight visual touch-up. There wasn't much different about it, and even the change in visuals weren't enough to pretty things up. Admittedly, it wasn't as awful as Escape Dead Island, but for open world games, you could do a lot better.
Give it up.
Gotham Knights. One would expect WB Montreal to learn from Rocksteady's more refined Batman Arkham games. To make a good superhero game of any caliber, you need, good combat, good storytelling, and a good balance between investigating crime, stealth, and fighting. Gotham Knights got none of that right, as WB Montreal was like, hey, we want our own Destiny too, and they essentially made a looter shooter with more currencies than they really needed. Fight random thugs to collect evidence points, randomly scan objects for any shred of lore, enemies that scream out the cringiest dialogue, heroes that are totally clueless to anything, and clearly have no skills. This isn't an open world superhero game. This may as well have been cosplayers trying to be crime fighters, which actually that would have been a more interesting game than this. Infestation Survivor Stories, aka The War Z. Oh yeah, we're going back to the early cesspool days of Steam Greenlight, back when plagiarism was running rampant as people stole code and assets just to repackage as a completely different named game, or straight up built a game and copied visuals in every aspect. That basically was what happened with The War Z. The game launched as a means to copy the more popular DayZ. The only difference was that The War Z was way more buggy, way more broken, and way more unplayable. The backlash only piled up as the game's executive producer was caught using homophobic slurs, trying to herd customers away from Steam, and was frequently dismissing complaints and criticisms over its business practices. It wasn't until 2016 when Infestation was taken offline. See ya! Redfall.
It's too late. But there are people who can fight back.
You know, if it wasn't for the pedigree behind Arcane Studios, maybe Redfall wouldn't have been more than a blip on the radar. Thing is that, as we mentioned, this was made by Arcane, the studio behind the Dishonored series and 2017's Prey. So, who in their right mind saw Redfall and thought, yeah, this empty world of dumb, clueless, glitching vampires is acceptable to ship to customers? Xbox has already been frustrating to deal with as a customer due to the severe lack of first-party releases. For a game that served as a show closer for the platform's E3 back in 2021 and was even delayed to, quote, bring the game to life, end quote, this was just simply unacceptable from a AAA first-party studio, and it only put more pressure on Starfield in the months leading up to its launch. The Amazing Spider-Man 2. There are plenty of awful Spider-Man games, about 3 for every good Spidey game. Spider-Man 3 will always be a bad choice, but if you want one that is absolutely, unfathomably bad, this is it. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 had some of the same problems like bad voice acting, character models, and web-swinging controls. The biggest crime, on the other hand, was optimization. This game runs about as well as a goblin glider left out in the middle of a hurricane. Inconsistent frame rates, stuttering, and bugs and glitches galore. You know the whole shebang. Doesn't matter what version you played, it was garbage all the same.
Say everyone's the hero of his own story. But come on, I'm the hero of this one.
Waifu Impact. Behold, the creepiest anime girls you have ever seen, mixed together with a half-assed designed island with gold stars to collect, gunplay lacking any unique mechanics or impact, and a soundtrack that makes nails on a chalkboard sound like Beethoven's Fifth. How do I know this? Because I played the game, I bought it myself, and I platinumed it twice. This so-called open-world experience is just, it's sheer shovelware. Shovelware at its very core. But somehow, it pushed its way to infamy thanks to the scantily clad waifus, each looking more dead inside than the last, and way more dead than I felt when I finished playing these. Save yourself the trouble. Go spend your $5 elsewhere. Road Rage. An open-world game centered on vehicular combat sounds like an awesome concept. Road Rage was not the one to show it. There is absolutely no life in this game in any way, shape, or form. Not in the level design, not in the combat, and certainly not in the controls. Vehicular combat games do have a place in modern gaming, but Road Rage isn't going to sell anybody on that vision. If only some flaming clown head would appear and do something about this mess left behind this pile of trash. Raven's Cry, aka Vendetta, Curse of the Raven's Cry.
As you wish.
Aye, aye, Captain. Blast it skyward!
A pirate-themed open-world game? You're better off playing Sea of Thieves, because Raven's Cry does not fit the bill. In fact, it deserves to be marooned and never remembered again. Of course, it does all of the things wrong just as our other entries have. Barren world, broken condition, obviously unfinished, the whole 9 yards. But arguably the biggest offense is the utterly tasteless writing. Yes, pirates were vile and despicable beings in history, but the way Raven's Cry leans into racist and sexist stereotypes does more harm than it does educate, commentate, or anything of the sort relating to the time period. Even after the relaunch, or pathetic rebrand, whatever you want to call it, the now called Vendetta Curse of the Raven's Cry is still abysmal, and, for some reason, still on the Steam store. Crackdown 3.
Enemy backup inbound. Watch yourself.
Xbox and Sumo Digital really screwed the pooch with this one. Crackdown 3 was going to be this explosive new entry in a long-dormant franchise with Terry Crews in a leading role. Then the delays happened, and after years of constantly getting pushed back, the game came and made a big, rancid stink. Crackdown 3 could barely handle any of the stuff it was doing between physics, destructible environments, explosions, everything. As for Terry Crews, you only get to see him in his role for like the first 10 minutes and then he's killed off. Clearly, no one learned from the innovations and mistakes of previous open world games, and Crackdown 3 certainly suffered for it. Day 1, Garry's Incident. It was the Steam trash to end all Steam trash. Day 1, Garry's Incident received massive backlash sparked by the late Total Biscuit. In a YouTube video, Total Biscuit showcased Day 1 in its abhorrent state, highlighting an inconsistent frame rate, pop-ins, failure to load in proper save states resulting in hard locking from missions, shoddy character animations, and more. Day 1 wouldn't have gotten as much attention had developer Wild Games not issued a copyright claim, causing the video to be taken down while also provoking Total Biscuit and various other YouTubers to continuously call them out for days to weeks to months. It just wasn't enough to admit a bad game was made, we needed to go and try to censor criticism. In the end, Wild Games Studios seem to have disappeared as all of their games are no longer on Steam and their website leads to just a Dynadot copyright page.
Check out these other great clips from MojoPlays, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos.